step amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, won't you step amaze me? Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, won't you step amaze me? If I find my way home, yeah. If I find my way home, yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy? Oh, won't you step amaze me?
If I'm coming back the right way. First up is the king. Super Mario 64, arguably the quintessential N64 game. Developed by Nintendo EAD and released originally in Japan on June 23rd, 1996 alongside the console, Pilotwing 64, and Saikyo Habu Shogi, Super Mario 64 is often credited as not only one of the most influential games ever created, but also simply one of the greatest games ever made. It was released in North America on September 29th, 1996, Europe on March 1st, 1997, and got a special re-release in Japan on July 28th, 1997, which contained English voice acting and Rumble Pack capabilities. The game went on to sell 11 million copies, making it the highest selling N64 game, and like I said before, the quintessential game for the console. At the time of release, it received very positive reviews, but as time has passed, it has received quite a bit of pushback because of clunky controls and camera issues. As far as I'm concerned though, it is one of the best that the N64 has to offer. And even though Super Mario 64 is great and arguably the father of 3D platformers, that doesn't mean that it can't go unchallenged. And it has quite the challenger. Banjo-Kazooie, a masterclass in 3D platforming. Developed by Rareware and released in North America on June 29th, 1998, and in Europe on July 17th of the same year, Banjo-Kazooie took everything that Mario 64 did and tried to one-up its predecessor. With wonderful music, graphics, and intriguing level design, Rareware was able to make an experience like no other in Banjo-Kazooie. This is also one of the few N64 games that has little to almost no pushback as it has aged. Games like Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, and GoldenEye 007, which were once hailed as the greatest games of all time, now have their critics, whereas Banjo-Kazooie seems almost unfazed. Why? Because this game is timeless in its design, its controls are enjoyable, and like mentioned before, it's got some dang good music. There's not much more to say, honestly. Alright, the match has been set. Banjo-Kazooie versus Super Mario 64. There are a couple of rules that I want to go ahead and set up for this matchup, and I want to state my biases right up front. If you want to skip all of this, go ahead and click on this timestamp right here. It'll take you past all of that real quick. But I feel that this is sort of necessary moving forward. First off, this comparison will contain both story and design spoilers, so if you care about that kind of stuff and you haven't played these games yet, then I recommend watching any other video. Also, this comparison will contain categories much like other versus videos of this style, but unlike other versus videos of this style, the winner will not be decided by the categories. Basically, which game I think is overall better will win, not the game that has more categories won, if that makes sense. The winner will also not necessarily be which game I like more, but rather the one that I think is overall better. With that said though, I do like Super Mario 64 more. I've played it my entire life, and I wasn't introduced to Banjo-Kazooie until the beginning of my college career. So, yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get to it. So the stories in these games aren't anything special in all honesty, but let's go ahead and take a look at them anyways. What are the stories and how are they told? Super Mario 64's story is simply that Mario is called upon by Princess Toadstool to come to the castle so that he can eat a cake that she has prepared. Booty call! But when Mario shows up, he is informed that the princess has been kidnapped and that the castle has been taken over by Bowser. That it. The story is told at the very beginning, almost all through text, in this very short scene at the beginning. Throughout the game, the different toads in the castle will give Mario encouragement, but no real story advancement happens. I'm about to talk about the ending and what happens if the player gets all 120 stars, so skip to this timestamp if you don't want it to be spoiled for you. It's a Mario game, so, you know, not much to spoil. In the end, Mario is able to defeat Bowser and he reunites with Peach. Then she invites him into the castle to eat that cake. There you go. If the player is able to collect all 120 stars, then on top of the castle, Mario can meet Yoshi, but this really serves no point, just a nice Easter egg. Banjo-Kazooie's story is a little bit more complicated. Gruntilda Winky Bunyan, the antagonist, realizes that hey, she ugly, and she wants to change this, so she devises a plan to swap her beauty with the most beautiful lady in the land, Tooty, who just so happens to be Banjo's sister. So she kidnaps Tooty while Banjo and Kazooie are sleeping, and when the pair wakes up to see what all the commotion was about, they are told by Bottles, the tutorial boy, what Grunty did, and they're off to save her. This story is told through the extensive cutscene at the beginning, so it pretty much gets everything out of the way right away. There's no real story advancement, but throughout the game, sometimes Grunty will pop up and taunt the duo with rhymes. How dare she? Once again, gonna talk about the ending and 100% bonuses, so if you care about that kind of stuff, skip to right here. Just putting this here so no one can complain. At the end of the game, Banjo-Kazooie are able to save Tooty and they go to relax, but they are interrupted by Tooty, who forces the duo to go back and fight Gruntilda. They defeat Grunty and she ends up being buried alive by a giant boulder. A bit grotesque, don't you think? And then everyone takes a vacation. If the player can collect 100 Jiggies, then Mumbo shares some information about the sequel, Banjo-Tooie. Banjo and Kazooie can now travel to areas in this game to find items that can be used in Tooie, except nope. Another thing that I want to add is that if the player gets a game over, then there's actually a cutscene that shows Grunty winning. It's something that I really enjoy about Rare games in general. Super Mario 64's story isn't really creative, and its storytelling isn't perfect either. Super Mario 64's story very much acknowledges that it's a game. It's a game's game, if that makes sense. Quick text, and then it's into the game. Banjo-Kazooie tries to be more creative in its storytelling, and I think its beginning cutscene is a very acceptable length, not too long. That said, its story isn't necessarily new, but, and this is very much a personal FreeXax thing, as long as other elements of the game are good and the story isn't really stupid and cringeworthy, then I don't really care. So with that said, next. Now I'm going to talk about controls. Starting up with Mario, he can jump with A, punch and kick with B, and crouch with Z. This is all pretty simple, but one thing that is so cool about Mario 64 is that with pretty much only these 3 buttons, the player can do seemingly a lot. First off, if you jump 3 times in a row while running, Mario can do a very high jump. In the air, he can punch and kick, and if he's jumping forward and the player presses B, Mario will do a dive. With the correct movement and timing, Mario can perform side flips and even wall jumps. He is also capable of doing a backflip, and while in the air with the press of the Z button, Mario will do a ground pound. While running, if Z and the A button is pressed quickly, Mario will do a long jump, which is praised to the moon and back. Also, he can do this. No real point, but I like it. One reason why I love this game as much as I do is because of Mario's movement. Transitioning from jumping to running and then more jumping is very smooth and exciting. That said, there isn't a real smooth way to transition into a backflip. In general, I love the movement in Super Mario 64. However, I understand that a lot of people have trouble with it. In particular, I know that a lot of people struggle to move slowly, and sometimes getting into that right position for a good jump or to walk next to a penguin isn't exactly what us hardcore gamers call easy. In addition, Super Mario 64 has a camera problem. Now, let me just say, I've been playing this game for my whole life, and I never once had a problem with the camera, until someone pointed it out to me in college. The camera in Mario 64 is problematic. Trying to get it to work with you so you can correctly time jumps isn't fun, and sometimes you can't even get the camera to move because for the most part it won't cut through walls. If there be a wall, it won't budge. As decent as I am with this game, the combination of a troublesome camera and sometimes awkward movement has put off quite a few gamers as Super Mario 64 has aged. I don't think it's bad, but problematic. How about Banjo-Kazooie? While Mario 64 took a rather simplistic approach to the controls, Banjo-Kazooie decided to complicate it all, and that's not a bad thing. In Banjo-Kazooie, you move with the control stick, jump with A, claw swipe with B, and crouch with Z. Similar to Mario 64, if the player presses Z then A, Banjo will do a backflip, which they dubbed the flap flip. While mid-jump, if A is pressed, then Banjo will do a feathery flap. While running, with a B press, Banjo will do a forward roll. There are also the attacks Rat-a-tat-rap, Beak Buster, and Beak Barge. These are the basics. However, Banjo-Kazooie decided to take advantage of those juicy C buttons. Through combining Z and a C button press, Banjo-Kazooie can do things like Talon Trot, Shoot and Poop Eggs, and Wonder Wing. Banjo-Kazooie doesn't have the same feel as Mario 64. Like Mario, for the most part, Banjo and Kazooie are fun to control. Banjo is a bit too slow and Kazooie is a bit too fast, but transitioning between the two and their moves is relatively smooth. And the jumping, while not exciting, is controlled. The camera in Banjo-Kazooie is also considerably better. The game controls well, but not in an exciting way. Swimming in Mario 64 kind of sucks, but not because it controls poorly. In fact, I think in terms of controls, it's good. Mario swims by pressing B, and if B is held, then Mario will slowly swim. The problem with swimming in Mario 64 is that it is too slow. Not just that, and this is a level design issue, but water levels are so big. Slow swimming and big levels? No. Banjo's swimming controls reflect its walking controls. Banjo swims real slow, and Kazooie is dang fast. There's no happy medium, but after playing this game twice, I got used to the controls and found no real problem. The issue there is that I had to play through twice to get used to the controls. That's all the main controls, but I want to talk about the upgrades in both games and how they control. Mario 64 has the caps: wing cap, metal cap, and vanish cap. The wing cap lets Mario fly or glide. Once in the air, it's difficult to get air, so it's basically falling in style. I've always had trouble timing the fight with this power-up. I think out of the 3D platformers, it may control the worst, and it doesn't feel like you're in control of it. Then there's the metal cap. This essentially makes Mario invincible to attacks, and he sinks when in water. Controls don't really change. The vanish cap also doesn't change controls. It makes Mario invincible to attacks, and he can walk through selected walls. It's not used very often. Banjo-Kazooie has a lot more of these upgrades. To begin with, boots. There are two kinds of boots in Banjo-Kazooie. The wading boots allow Banjo and Kazooie to trek through deep and dangerous waters and such. And then there's the turbo trainers, which gives the two a momentary speed boost. Both control like they should. There's nothing wrong with them. Then there are the pads. There's the shock jump pad, which gives them a high jump, and then the flight pad, which makes them fly. The flying is pretty good in this game. It's not as fast as Mario's, but it's fair. Maneuvering in the air is rather easy, and you can do the beak bump for an aerial attack or just to move faster. I have had trouble with flying at some points though. It's not perfect. Banjo-Kazooie also has transformations. There's the termite who can climb steep hills, the crocodile who can attack enemies with a bite attack, this is the best transformation, the walrus who can enter the freezing water with no problem, the pumpkin who is small and can enter small spaces, and the bee who can fly around wherever. For the most part, the transformations are used to enter small spaces and play mini games of sorts. Overall, both games have solid transformations and power-ups, but Banjo offers more, which is something that can be said about Banjo's controls in general. Is more better? Not inherently, but if the more isn't overwhelming and the more is used well, then I think more can be better. Banjo uses what it has very well. So, if you've seen any of my older verses, you may know that I'm not the best at reviewing music and graphics. If something sounds cool, I like it. If something looks pretty, I like it. With that said, I decided to combine these two categories into presentation. Hopefully that works for you. Super Mario 64, as far as music goes, well, it's not bad. As much as I love this game, I have never loved the music. I've never thought that the soundtrack was outstanding. The opening track, Bomb on Battlefield theme, and the credits track are memorable, and I know that a lot of people like the theme from Dire Dire Docks, but the tunes from Hazy Maze Cave, Lethal Lava Land, and Boo's Haunted Mansion, while undeniably befitting of the levels that they're in, aren't necessarily great, catchy tunes. But like I said, they definitely fit the areas that they're in, which is something that Koji Kondo is especially good at doing. While he can and has written very exciting and catchy tunes, I think he's a master in atmosphere and variety. For the most part, a lot of these tunes are very separate from each other, and each have their own style and feel. That said, the Slider theme and Cool Cool Mountain themes are essentially the same, but with different instruments to give off different feelings. Overall, I don't think I have anything bad to say about the soundtrack because it gets the job done. Banjo-Kazooie, on the other hand, gets the job done and then some. Almost every single track in Banjo-Kazooie from the opening thing is, well, for the lack of a better term, dang good. The only track that I'd argue isn't really up to snuff is Clinker's Cavern, and to be honest, if I spend more than 10 minutes listening to Gobi's Valley, I want to end my life. But luckily, Grant Kirkhope found a way to break up his tunes to keep them from getting annoying. If the player enters certain areas of levels like water or a building, the music will change ever so slightly, giving a break from the main track. And arguably, the longest level, Click Clock Wood, gets 4 different versions of its track to fit the 4 different seasons. For the most part, all the tracks fit where they were put, but maybe Bubble Gloop Swamp's track is too exciting for a swamp. Grant added in frog noises and such to make it feel swampy, which is something he is very good at, adding in animal noises for effect. So pretty much what I'm saying is that all of these tunes are quality. One thing that Kirkhope wasn't the best at when it came to Banjo-Kazooie, Tooie, DK64, and even Yooka-Laylee was variety. There are certain musical motifs and themes that Grant likes to use, and arguably overuse. When I was first listening to the Banjo soundtrack, I felt a lot of it sounded the same. I think if you wanted to and were talented enough, you could create a giant remix with all these tunes easily, Chris. What? Now, don't construe this as something bad. I actually like when games have musical themes, because it helps to create a sort of consistency in the game. Banjo-Kazooie does this well for the most part, while a game like Yoshi's Story really just drives it into you. Banjo-Kazooie has voice acting. Kind of. Each character that the player can talk to has grunts, and while this is charming, it can get a bit nerve-wracking after a while. Usually, enemies have voices too, and they'll usually grunt before charging. It's very cute, and something that Mario 64 didn't do. Mario 64 has some voice acting, but not too much. At the beginning, Peach has some voice acting, but other than that, it's Mario's excited shouts and such. He also will say things that the player just kind of sits around and does nothing. It's something subtle that I've always loved. Super Mario 64 is an okay-looking game, but it is by no means a pretty game. Mario and the enemy models do not look great, and the scenery is all very flat. It is very much a polygonal game. Even the colors that they chose are very bright with no texture. Being the first N64 game is probably why this is the case, but still. That said, I think Bowser looks okay, the intro screen looks fantastic, and there isn't any point in the game where the graphics get in the way of the player being successful. Mario 64's graphics are okay, but nothing special. Absolutely nothing special. Banjo-Kazooie's graphics are better. Banjo, Kazooie, and other character models are not only more complicated, but simply cleaner. The worlds and backgrounds have more vibrant and mixed colors that make everything feel more real. The items and obstacles that can be found in each level don't look nearly as polygonal. The first time playing Banjo, I was genuinely surprised. I didn't think the N64 games could look this good. Not much else that I could say about it, it's dang good. Now we're in the good part. While good controls are necessary, if you don't have a good place to use the controls, then there really is no point. I think as far as level design goes for both games, it's top notch. First though, let's talk about the overworlds. Super Mario 64's overworld is Peach's castle, and the way that the player enters the different levels is through paintings. Something worth noting is that there are castle secret stars, but they're kind of repetitive, and some of them are just sort of mini levels. They're not really in the castle. Mario has a lot of levels, so with the exception of the first star, multiple levels are accessible at any given point. The castle is also relatively small, so getting from level to level is easy. Banjo-Kazooie's overworld is Grunty's lair. It is seemingly bigger and more like a level than an overworld. It's good. Usually the player is supposed to enter levels one at a time, and the overworld is designed around this. Each level is fairly far from each other, and usually the player can access the next area after completing the level previous, with the exception of Gobi's Valley and FreeXax Peak, which you have to enter one of them at least twice. At least this is the way it's seemingly designed. There are 10 of the game's collectibles, the Jiggies, in the overworld, and the player actually has to solve puzzles to collect them. It's a very interactive overworld, and I love it. How about the levels? Not including the castle secret stars, there are 15 levels in Super Mario 64, and there are 7 stars per level. In Mario 64, once the player gets a star, they are booted from the level, which makes Mario 64 flexible in how you can play, and honestly, it can be a very non-linear game. It can be. In general, I think the design and missions in Mario 64 are good. Almost every level's first mission requires the player to either go to the tip top or tip bottom, so then the player can explore most of the level. Good design, I think. That said, in general, the water levels are boring and ruin the flow of the game, as mentioned before. I went ahead and I chose 5 levels to talk about more in depth. Arguably, these are 5 of the more noteworthy levels. Bomb on Battlefield, of course, I think is a very solid level, especially for a first level. First mission, you explore, and through design, you're taught the basic controls, so then the following missions are basically practice, running and jumping and such. This level also forces the player to go out and explore and play non-linearly, because one of the missions requires the wing cap, which can't be acquired at the beginning, and the player has to collect more stars from other levels, so it teaches the player about the overarching design of the game. I do not like Jolly Roger Bay. This is kind of due to how the first mission structure is. You gotta swim to the sunken ship, but oh no, there be an eel. So then you have to swim away and discover that there be nothing to do. So then the player goes back and no more eel, so guess what? Now the player can enter the ship. This is another forced exploration type of deal, however, it feels like bad forced exploration. It's not the player sort of naturally exploring, but rather misdirection, and it's kind of lazy. Other than that, I don't like this level because, as mentioned, swimming is slow and not exciting. So getting around in this level is so boring. And this level in particular is really big. I enjoyed Lethal Lava Land, but I get this sense that it was the leftovers level. Like, they had a few ideas, the 8 coins puzzle, log rolling, and the 2 stars in the volcano, which could honestly go into any other setting and be just fine, and they just kind of threw it all together. It's a minigame level. The bully missions are essentially the same in the same area, which is arguably the laziest part of this game. Fun level, but odd, and I think it works overall, but it does make the level look the most unrealistic. Tick-Tock Clock is an interesting level because how you enter the clock determines how the level moves, and I love this. It makes this level beyond unique, and each time the player enters the level, they have to adapt. That said, this level can be the most frustrating level. Sometimes adapting just isn't fun, and it can come off as random. Rainbow Ride is the last level, and boy does it suck. They couldn't really do a scrolling level in 3D Mario, so we got this. It's a lot of waiting, which is okay, but not for the final level, because it's sort of anticlimactic in terms of how the game is designed. The final level really lacks that punch. The moments on the flying carpets are very boring, and falling is painful to watch because waiting. Any slip up here is instant death and then more waiting. But the moments without the carpets and the platforming are genuinely good, but it takes so long to get to them. Don't get me wrong, I love Mario 64 and most of its levels, but it has its fair share of frustrating moments, design-wise. How about Banjo-Kazooie? Not including Grunty's Furnace Fun, there are 9 levels in Banjo-Kazooie, and they are all some dang good levels, for the most part. When you collect Jiggies in Banjo-Kazooie, you're not kicked from the level, but you can instead continue. For the most part, all levels can be completed on their first go. This makes the overarching design in Banjo linear, because you go to level one by one, but the design in the levels, since it doesn't have the mission-based structure, is non-linear. Another collectible in Banjo are the notes, which are used to unlock portions of the overworld. One big issue with Banjo-Kazooie is that you have to collect all 100 of these in one go, because if you leave the level or die, the notes will reset. So when you enter a level, these are important to keep an eye out for and collect carefully. There's also the empty honeycomb pieces, which will boost Banjo's overall health if he collects 6 pieces. There are 2 per stage. Mumbo's Mountain is the first stage, and it's solid. This level, Banjo-Kazooie can learn to shoot and poop eggs, and the Talon Trot, and it provides ample enough space to practice both of these techniques. Also, the transformation in this level is the Termite, who is like Super Talon Trot, and I like that this transformation builds on a move just learned. Next, I want to talk about Quaker's Cavern. This level is not a bad level. The problem is that this level is fairly difficult, and it's a water level. You gotta swim, but swimming practice to this point in the game was fairly limited. Small pond, shark-infested water. The player has to get good at swimming here. More specifically here, which I don't think is fair to new players. Like I said before, it took me playing this game 2 times all the way through to get used to the controls. But overall, this level isn't bad. It actually tests out the player really well with the water mechanics, and unlike a Mario water level, I think it keeps the underwater portions engaging. Next up is FreeXax Peak, which I think may be a fairly solid level. Early in the game, the player learns how to fly, and this level sort of tests out the flying attack. Beak Bomb. Gotta attack those snowmen and the buttons. There's also this part which is supposed to test the player's flying skills, but I think it shows how finicky the flying controls can be, because trying to turn to enter the star constantly can be a total drag. Other than that though, this level exists. Rusty Bucket Bay, while arguably the most aggravating and difficult level, is probably the most well designed. This level escalates the challenge of swimming and has relatively challenging platform segments. This level is also a giant circle, which I think was done to make it easier, but the level of difficulty that Rusty Bucket Bay has in a place like Gobi's Valley, where everything is sort of scattered and people would spend days here. Make it a circle and it's easier to navigate. The engine room is an absolute hassle though, especially if you don't know about it going in, and losing your notes here is heartbreaking. Finally is Quick Clock Wood, and it's so good. This level starts off difficult, but gets easier, and it pretty much challenges the player in every aspect of the game. Platforming, flying, swimming, defeating enemies, raising a baby eagle, you get the point. Also, you're essentially playing one level 4 times, and I love watching as the level progresses. It's like watching the level design process itself, and that's beyond interesting to someone like me. I think out of all the 3D platforming levels on the N64 I've ever played, Quick Clock Wood is the most well designed, and at the very least, it's the most creative. It's reasonably challenging for a final level and not instant death like another final level, and the atmosphere here is perfect. All in all, Banjo's levels are fantastic with very few missteps. And then there's Grunty's Furnace Fun, and I hate it. I know I'm in the minority, but I think if you're going to have a game with well fleshed out worlds, secrets to discover, and just good level design in general, ending the game on a quiz is underwhelming. I honestly took it as a middle finger the first time I played. It has callbacks to the previous levels, which is nice, and the player is truly tested on how much they paid attention to the game. But, and hear me out, what is wrong with ending with Quick Clock Wood? Quick Clock Wood would have been a great place to essentially end the game. Overall though, I think both games have solid level design. Which game has better level design though? I can't really answer that question here because I don't want to spoil the results of the matchup, but to be fair, I think it's pretty obvious which game I think has overall better design. Bosses. So both games have multiple bosses. Maybe, but I want to talk about the big ones, Bowser and Gruntilda. I like the Bowser fight. I can't think of many other fights where the joystick is what you're supposed to mainly use. First off, I like the escalation of the Bowser fights. For the most part, you learn basic grabbing techniques in the first mission, and then can apply that in the boss fight. First, Bowser is barely any trouble at all. It's all about getting used to the spinning. The second fight, Bowser has more moves, but unimpressively, it's essentially the same fight. The third and final fight, Bowser has more techniques, and it takes not 1, not 2, but 3 times blowing up Bowser this way, which can actually get challenging. Seeing the bombs dwindle and the stage crumble is nerve-wracking, and it turns this relatively simple and easy fight into something challenging. I love it from its design aspect, but admittedly, repeating the 3 fights does come off as lazy. Gruntilda. So before I start, I want to say that Gruntilda is not a bad boss, but maybe misplaced. Banjo-Kazooie lacks clear-cut bosses. Klungo, Snipper, Mutant Snippets, Golden Frogs, the Snowmen, the Hand, Giant TNT Box, and the Buck Bumblers could all be considered boss-like, but I'm not 100% sure, especially because the Golden Feathers can be used defensively on some of them. Hacks! No clear-cut bosses means that there's no clear-cut fighting, so Banjo-Kazooie is less about combat and more about exploring and puzzle solving. So when the player first fights Grunty, are they combat ready? I'd argue, not necessarily. The one part of the Grunty fight that feels very Banjo-Kazooie-ish is the ending sequence when the player has to shoot the eggs into the statues. Everything else is very combat-oriented with a lot of quick reflexes needed. Not really what I had associated with the rest of the game. Not a bad boss, but I think Grunty could have benefited from having other bosses that led up to her. Sort of how King Bomb shows off the basic grab in the game, and then you fight Bowser twice before the final, actually challenging battle. Grunty just needs more build-up. And now it's time for my conclusion. When I first came up with verses, thinking about comparing these two was very difficult. I think very highly of both games. Both of them are top-notch. Super Mario 64 was revolutionary and deserves all the credit that it gets, and most of its flack. Honestly, I think it's a great game. Then there's Banjo-Kazooie with its fluid gameplay and wonderful levels. There's a certain feeling that I get when I play it that I don't feel with other games. With all of this said, the winner is Banjo-Kazooie. In almost all aspects, Banjo-Kazooie is a better game. The controls and camera are nice, the music, sound design, and graphics are N64 top-notch, and the level design is a masterclass in 3D platformers. It does so much right. Super Mario 64 is not a bad game by any means, but Banjo-Kazooie took what Mario 64 did and improved it. And there we have it. Banjo-Kazooie is the winner. Go ahead and leave a comment telling me what you think about both games. I'm genuinely interested to see what people have to say. I've now had many years to reflect on both these games and this comparison. If you did happen to see my original Banjo-Kazooie vs. Super Mario 64 video, I am curious to hear what your thoughts are on this video. Differences, stuff like that. I'm honestly a little bit unsure, but I'm kind of curious to see where where this new style is gonna take me. I'm wanting to try out some new things, and well, let's just see where it takes us. Until next time. For those who don't know, I recently spent 1 year living and studying in Japan. It was absolutely life-changing in many ways. I met many great people, I learned a foreign language, lost a lot of weight, and my way of thinking was challenged. I think I'll find adjusting to living in America difficult, and in some ways, I'm afraid that I could go back to my depressive state, because as weird as this sounds, Fukuoka, Japan felt like my home. But now I'll be with my family for the first time in years, so that's nice. Hopefully creating these videos will help to keep me busy, and I want to bring some of you happiness. So let's see where the future takes us. Join me for one more season of Versus, and let's enjoy this next year together. For now though, good night.